Hi. The book I chose to do for my book talk right now was one of my nonfiction choice books in class, and it's called they call themselves the KKK. It's by Susan Campbell Bartoletti. So if you want to see the cover, this is what it looks like. You can get it off Amazon. But this is an awesome book if you teachers out there are looking to teach in class. There's a lot of history. It's very quick. So even if you want to use this as like aside to some book, maybe To Kill a Mockingbird, or I don't know, some book you want to use in class, or if you want to work with a history teacher as like a pre-thing, this is a great book to teach. You can teach it to show how hate crimes or like hate groups form, because honestly, you don't get to the actual KKK group until about the middle of the book. So this has a lot of facts in it, and there's newspaper articles, there's pictures throughout, there's quotes from slaves, from very significant people throughout history. There's a lot of stuff in here, and this is just great. And there also is political cartoons. If you guys like cartoons. I think it was the one that I really like that I'm going to be talking about significantly is this. It's some black children there on the fence, and this goes with this theory of the bottom rail, which is, I'll get more to it in a little bit, but it's basically talking about how, the slaves in the middle class, and they're going to rise or fall, or, it's kind of like the pyramid of classes, if you guys have ever learned that in class. But, so that's, I'll get to that later, but, this book starts out, like, right in the beginning, so there's a lot of history in the beginning, so, it might be a little boring if you're not into history, but you need this in order to get to how the KKK actually formed. So it starts out, you're in the Civil War, and the Confederacy was disintegrating, and the Yankees were actually sweeping over the South, and which means they were just ruining the white Southerners. They were burning their plantations, their houses, everything, and the whites were, or the white Southerners were losing everything, the Confederates. So the Yankees stole, they were thieves, and the Confederates actually considered them to be, the Yankees, to be the Blue Devils, they called them, determined to destroy the South. So that's what they called them. So it goes on, but then later on, in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was put into place, which freed slaves from the 11 rebel states and their territories. So then later on it goes on, 1865, which is just 2 years later, the 13th Amendment was passed by Congress, which freed slaves completely. But, yeah, it did that, but they had the blacks had a long struggle to go ahead of them after that. Just like today, we have laws everywhere. I'm sure you speed every day going to class or something. I'm sure there's underage drinkers every weekend out here. So no matter what laws are passed, people always try to get around them. So the blacks had a long way to go. And it goes on, and I think you just have to read this because I'm probably just confusing you. But it goes on later on to say that, since the slaves were gone, a lot of them, the slaves, there was acres and acres of land, and the slaves would harvest the land sometimes, take care of it, take care of the whites' families, they did a lot. So the whites are freaking out, like, oh, we're on our own, what are we going to do? And we're losing everything from the Yankees, so they're freaking out. So the Southerners were actually, since they just lost the war and their slaves are gone now, they're freaking out because they think that the slaves are going to take over them now. And I'm sure the whites treat them harshly, and they're really freaking out that the blacks are going to do the same to them. So this is where I come into the concept of the bottom rail raising. So the big thing was bottom rail, top. So, I mean, there was one instance in this book where one of the former slaves went up to his master and was like, hey, master, bottom rail up, or top, sorry, and, the master was pissed. So there's nothing he can do, though, because he's freaking out that this is actually going to happen. So, there's a lot of, it's great, this book's great because there's a lot of recounts and, or recollections, I guess, and just quotes from former people of the past who have actually lived this. And, so, keeps going. Same year, 1865, the Confederate General Robert E. Lee, he surrendered his army to Ulysses S. Grant, who is the commander of the Union Army. So this ends the war. And so now, another misinterpretation, I guess, of this time, like, I personally did think that most all white people did own slaves, but that's actually false. And like, with this history going on, like, throughout, like, once that was told that the wars ended, and the whites are still freaking out, and the white Southerners, that is. So then it goes on later to say, like, it wasn't just the people who owned slaves that were freaking out, it was people who were losing everything as well. One of the quotes I have here actually says, most white Southerner families did not own slaves. Those who did, about 1 out of every 4 families, felt anger at the loss of their valuable human property. Before the war, each slave was worth about $1,000, which is about $13,000 nowadays. So, and the average slaveholder owned between 1 and 9 slaves, and some of the wealthiest planters owned hundreds. So, I mean, $13,000 times 9, 10, 11, 100, just think of that nowadays. I don't know where that money comes from. But, I mean, they were expensive. Human labor. Think of maids and stuff nowadays. It's probably expensive to get your stuff cleaned. And so they were freaking out because they just lost all that money they spent on slaves. And they're getting everything ruined now. So they have no money. And all this money they invested in, as they said, human property, it's gone. So, then it keeps going, and here's one of the recounts actually from a former Confederate soldier. He said that we lost all of our stock, the slaves were emancipated, and a great many plantation houses and fencing were burned, and we were out of provisions, and at least 99 men out of 100 were in debt, having nothing left but our land. So you can kind of see how just the attitudes of the white Southerners right now, because they've lost everything. So, sometimes when you lose everything, people just can do the unthinkable. And so it goes on and on to keep talking about this. There's prices that go on, like, comparing, like, what the money was years before compared to what it is now. So I think that's a very significant point to make in books. In, like, classrooms, because, I know if I read, it was $1,000, I'd be like, oh, well, that's cheap. That's like a car now, I guess. Well, not cheap, but, like, that'd be like buying a car. Well, a junky car. But, when you compare it to, no, it was $13,000. Like, that's a significant increase. So, it goes on a lot about that. And then, so the bottom rail up, the whites are freaking out, and it just leads to a lot of tension, which eventually, I'm going to get into how the Klan formed. So, there's 6 men, and, they have all these facts out there, but they're not 100% positive, I guess. And they make that point a lot in here, that they think, this may have started this way. So, and I'm sure there's many other books out there that say the exact same things, but basically start with 6 men, and this, you probably heard these names throughout history. It's John Lester, Calvin Jones, Richard Reed, James Crow, Frank McCord, and John Kennedy. These were 6 Confederate officers from Tennessee, and they would meet in their law office after work and probably sit around and just shoot the shit with each other and talk. And obviously social issues are going on, so they're going to talk about that. Um, so, as I said, like, there's a lot of different, there's just so many, like, this whole book keeps going on about how, um, so it starts off, I'll get back to these 6 men in a little bit, but in the middle of this, like, just, they introduce it, like, in the beginning, and they kind of tell some more history, so you kind of get lost sometimes in the book, so you gotta kind of, what I did is I highlighted a lot and wrote notes, but you kind of get lost sometimes because of how the book is set up. But then it goes on to how President Johnson, he was a Southern lawmaker and he passed the Black Codes later on. So now, and the Black Codes were actually based off the former slave codes. So now, slaves are freed, but now you're going right back to it, and they're charging fees and everything, and if you weren't able to pay the fines, they had to go back and work for their masters, I guess. So, a lot of this is after Lincoln died, obviously. So, as I told you, I'm leaving out a lot of history. But, so it goes on to President Johnson a little bit, and then, we get back to the 6 fellows I was talking to you about earlier. And, as I said, they don't know 100% of how the Klan actually started, because if you go in a room with 6 people, how are you going to know, how is an outsider going to tell you what happened in that room? They're not, unless, somebody ratted it out, but even that, it's, a game of telephone, and you had a recorder, which probably didn't have back then, so, 1800s, but, so, this is what the book says. It says, all that is known is that one May evening in 1866, as the men lounged about the law office, this is the place they hung out at, John Lester said suddenly to his friends, "Boys, let's get up, a club or society." So they have all this rage because now, and now that the blacks are back, the whites know that they're still on top. And now that President Johnson put them back to the bottom, they know they have power, and they have all this hate built up inside of them and anger, and they want to start a club. Which, if you read this really does show how hate crimes start and everything. So, or hate crimes, hate groups, and they're angry. So, they're starting up this thing. So, they go through all this, nitty gritty stuff of what are we going to call it, all this. So, they actually based, they call themselves the first Ku Klux. And they say that Calvin Jones and Richard Reed actually came up with this. And it actually comes from a Greek word which means circle or band. So, like a band of brothers, maybe. So, and obviously when they were inducted into this club, they had to take a vow of secrecy. So that's, band, I guess. In the band, I don't know. So, then later on they didn't find that Ku Klux was, very capturing, I guess. So, then James Crow actually offered up Ku Klux, sorry. And later on, then somebody said they had Klan in there, and that's where they got it, to Ku Klux Klan. And later it says that John Lester would boast about the occult-like power of the mysterious name of the Ku Klux Klan. So that's how the name got started. And then, it seemed like they were just, it's amazing because I don't know anything about fraternities or sororities. I'm not involved in them. I don't know anything about them. So I guess there was fraternities and sororities back then, and the Ku Klux Klan is actually based, it says the rules were closely patterned after the Ku Klux Adelphi fraternity. I'm sorry if I said that wrong for all you fraternities and sororities out there, but I tried to do some research on that, and I couldn't find much. So it would be really interesting to see what those rules are and what was going on at that time, I guess. But yeah, they had secret codes, handshakes, hazing new members, and everything. So that was very interesting, and so this just spread like rapid fire, like the Klan did, and people were just liking the name, and everyone had this hate for the blacks, and so they were all joining. So then later, it goes on. They raided a linen closet and they got on their horses and paraded the town. And there's a quote later on in the book that I have right here. It says that John Lester, like after this is after the circumstances following the surrender, and this is his justification of the formation of the Ku Klux Klan. So this is what he says why they did it and all this. He says there may be in their conduct some things to regret and some to condemn. But he who gets a full understanding of their surroundings, social and civil and political,